His name shook the frontier. Geronimo, the Apache warrior who refused to surrender. For decades, he led his people through deserts, mountains, and battles against the US and Mexican armies. To settlers, he was a ruthless outlaw. To his people, he was their shield, their last hope for freedom. His story is one of survival, resistance, and a will that no bullet could break. Okay, so before we get into this video, let's take a moment to acknowledge that these are very much stolen lands. The lands we now call the United States is a colonial project built on genocide. I'm making this video on Tomba land, which is also the traditional territory of the Chumash, Serrano, and Tataviam people. If you want to learn more about the indigenous people who call this area home, visit the websites below. So let's begin. It all began back in 1829 when he was born in the rugged land of what is now Arizona. At the time, the area was a part of Mexico, but despite being of mixed Mexican and native descent, he would become known by his Apache name, Goclia, because he was raised by his maternal grandfather, who was an Apache chief. When he was a young man, he lived as a hunter, a husband, and a father. But in 1851, everything changed. In 1851, Geronimo was away trading when a group of Mexican soldiers attacked his camp. They killed his wife, his children, and his mother. This tragic event turned the young trader into a fierce warrior. From that moment on, Geronimo vowed revenge against the Mexican government. He was willing to do whatever it took to bring down those responsible for the massacre of his family. He would never again live as just a man. He would live as a warrior. But Geronimo wasn't just any warrior. He was a leader who inspired his people and terrified his enemies. He was a master tactician who knew how to use the terrain to his advantage, leading his followers on daring raids against the Mexicans. The Apache people revered him as a kind of supernatural figure, someone who could charge into gunfire without fear and emerge unscathed. To them, he was a symbol of hope in a time of despair, a beacon of resistance against those who sought to destroy them. As Geronimo gained more victories, his reputation grew. People across the Southwest heard tales of his bravery and wondered about the man who seemed to be unstoppable. Soon enough, Geronimo became known throughout the region as El Terrible, the Terrible One. The name stuck, and it was a fitting moniker for a man who had become a thorn in the side of the Mexican government. But this would just be the beginning of the story, because as the years went on, Geronimo's conflict would not only be with the Mexican government, but also the US government, and it had become a fight for survival against two nations. The Mexican government saw Geronimo as a dangerous rebel, and they weren't going to stand for his raids on their territory. They sent soldiers after him, but they kept coming back empty-handed. Geronimo always seemed to be one step ahead of them. In response, the US government offered Geronimo a deal. If he stopped his attacks on Mexican soil and surrendered, they would give him amnesty and allow him to keep his fortune. But Geronimo refused. He was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stop him from fighting for his people. And then in 1861, the Civil War broke out and would have a major impact on the conflict between the Apache and the US government. During the Civil War, the US government had bigger problems than a group of rebels in the Southwest. They didn't want to risk sending troops to fight Geronimo and his men because they needed all the soldiers they could get for the war effort. So they left Geronimo and his people alone. But as soon as the war ended, they came back with a vengeance. Now the US government wanted to punish the Apaches for not staying neutral during the war and for resisting their authority. They started sending more troops to the area to try to capture Geronimo, but he continued to evade them. Throughout the 1870s, Geronimo and his men fought back against the US Army. He used hit-and-run tactics to weaken his enemies, and he was successful. But as the years went on, his band of warriors got smaller and smaller. Many of his followers were killed in battle or captured and sent to reservations. But Geronimo still refused to surrender. Then, in 1881, things took a dark turn. The U.S. Army, under the command of General George Crook, launched a brutal campaign against the Apaches. They burned their villages, destroyed their crops, and killed anyone who resisted. And Geronimo watched helplessly as his people suffered. In desperation, he fled to Mexico and asked for help. But the Mexican government was not interested in getting involved in the conflict. They had their own problems to deal with, and they didn't want to risk angering the U.S. government, so Geronimo was on his own. He returned to the U.S. and continued to fight, but it was a losing battle. His band was small, and the U.S. Army was relentless. Finally, in 1886, Geronimo surrendered. It was a heartbreaking moment. His people had been fighting for their freedom for decades, and now it was over. But why did Geronimo surrender? Well, the reasons are complex. On one hand, he was tired of fighting, and he wanted his people to have a chance at peace. On the other hand, he was captured and his band was dwindling. It was only a matter of time before he would be caught. But still, it was a difficult decision. Geronimo was a proud warrior, and he didn't want to give up. But he knew that continuing the fight would only lead to more death and destruction. So he chose to surrender in hopes of a better future for his people. After his surrender, Geronimo was imprisoned, and he spent the rest of his life as a prisoner of war. He was moved from one reservation to another, and he never got the chance to return home. He became a celebrity of sorts, being paraded around at fairs and expositions as a living relic of the Wild West. People would line up to see him and hear his story. And Geronimo always held his head high. He was a proud warrior, and he didn't let his captors break him. In 1909, Geronimo died in Oklahoma. He was 80 years old, and he had been in captivity for more than 20 years. But even in death, his legend lived on. The Apache people remembered him as a hero, a man who fought for their freedom until there was no fight left. And his name continues to inspire people today. There's a famous quote attributed to Geronimo that goes, "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees." And it sums up his life perfectly. He was a fighter who never gave up, even in the face of impossible odds. But Geronimo wasn't just a warrior. He was also a leader and a symbol of resistance against oppression. His story is a reminder that no matter how powerful the oppressor, the fight for freedom is always worth it. So the next time you hear the name Geronimo, remember that it was more than just a name. It was a symbol of courage, defiance, and hope. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, please make sure to like it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. All that stuff really helps us out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.